All right, so I said I had more content planned yesterday. I just did my Type R talk. Now this one is going to be shorter because it's a little bit easier, simpler, to the point. I addressed this like probably about a year ago, but I kind of masked it under a different video title that I should have. So I'll talk about it again real quick. And I is like the old one, if you want to go see that, is why I don't talk about B series Vtec killer. But this is why I don't talk about Vtec killer in general when it comes to anything other than K series. All right, so let me explain this real quick again, even though I've talked about it several times. You just got to dig for it. You got to look. Vtec killer is you're eliminating Vtec. You're eliminating the Vtec crossover. You are locking Vtec in place. So that means that you are always riding on the big Vtec lobe. There is no lower economy lobe for you to ride on. Vtec's always engaged. Why they call it Vtec killer, I don't know. It maybe sounds cool, but that's what everybody addresses it as, even though it's locked Vtec, eliminated Vtec, whatever. So the aspect of locking in your Vtec does not increase power. You know, Vtec, when Vtec engages in, that's when you're at peak power of your car. So what you're doing is just making it at that power level all the time. Now, if you're thinking that, oh, well, that would make it faster in the lower power band range or whatnot, you got to talk to tuners about that, because from what I hear from a lot of people, or from what I've seen from a lot of people, that complain that it doesn't perform as well on the lower side as it does on the higher side. But that's neither here nor there. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're just saying this, that locking your Vtec does not increase power. So if you have an engine and you're deciding, I'm going to lock this Vtec in, and you're not doing anything to it cam wise, you are not increasing power. Now, there are two reasons why Vtec can be locked. Now, there's one that we can say general. This applies to all the Honda engines with Vtec. Now, there are performance camshafts out there made that are only made with a single lobe. Vtec. Now, I would imagine that this is because there's a little bit less mass on the camshaft, so it's a little bit less weight. Those are dedicated race cars. These are cars that are only going to see high RPMs because they are dedicated track cars. Usually drag strip cars, like cars that are going to be at the top of the RPM range from the moment they let go to the moment they stop. So you do not need lower cams. You can just lock it in, have your Vtec locked in, have those rockers locked, and have that on all times. All right, that's one reason, right? Now, the second reason why you lock Vtec, and the reason why I say this is only pertinent for the K-Series, is because if you look at the K-Series camshafts, they're all interchangeable. Like, all the heads are pretty much like the same cast for the most part, and chamber differences, I know. But for the most part, they're the same. There's only two major differences between, like, the non-Vtec, the base model economy heads versus like the real Vtec heads, which is the thing that makes the hugest difference. The biggest difference is the reason why you have to lock Vtec to use the real cams. The real Vtec heads have 3 rockers in the valve train. Now, why can't you just switch over the rockers and have all 3? Well, you have 2 rockers that float on valve springs, and you have the center rocker that is what the Vtec rocker is, bounces on a lost motion assembly spring. There's a notch in the head, there's a notch with a hole in it, and there's a spring that just sits there. It just goes into that hole. That's the lost motion assembly spring. Now, that hole where that spring sits in for that rocker to ride on is non-existent for the base model heads. I wish I had one sitting here. I could just show you real quick. That hole is not there. So because that hole is not there, there's nothing for that middle spring, that Vtec spring, to ride on. So if you were to try to put all 3 inside that head, that spring or that rocker arm would just be sitting there dead because there's nothing for it to keep it in place. And if you were to try and lock Vtec, or once Vtec cross over, it's supposed to lock into that third one, so that way it rides on that, so that way when the Vtec lobe hits, it pushes it down all the way to the 2 on the side. But if there's nothing to lock into there, then you can't ride on that. So to be able to use that bigger cam, you have to lock those springs in permanently, because that way there's no crossover. There's nothing, because it won't be able to lock in. But if it's already locked in, then you're already riding on that Vtec lobe. So that's why you eliminate that crossover. Now, why would you want to do that for the base model heads? Well, because the cam that comes in the real Vtec head is fucking enormous compared to the base model cam. So it's a very big lift. It's a very big lift difference. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. I've searched on it before. It's a really big difference. And you can see the difference on the fucking dyno. right? The K24A4, the base model K24A4, is rated for 160 horsepower. That's crank, right? 160 horsepower. With bolt-ons and the Vtec cams, consistently, the K24A4 will make 210 horsepower. That is an insane jump for a cam and bolt-ons. That's really big. That's a huge difference, right? That is an enormous reason to do that. Like, why would you bother switching out your head if you can make that on a cam swap? Now, the argument would be is that you're fucking up your drivability, and yes, you're definitely going to burn through a lot more fuel because you're going to be riding on your performance lobe, so you're not going to have an economy version of that engine. But yes, you can daily drive a VTEC killer. I've seen enough of them out there that are tuned properly and sound fine. You can do that. It's just not going to get the best fuel economy out of it. Obviously, you're doing it for performance. Performance means burning more fuel. All right, so but if you look at that just a stock VTEC cam, even like the inferior TSX cams, now you look at those, even if you compare the stock cams versus a performance camshaft for the base model, like a camshaft that's built for the base model that's a performance version, it's still got higher lift than those. So that's why you do that for the K series, and that's why I say you only do it for the K series. Now for the B series, I'm not 100% sure because I've been lazy. I haven't gone out and actually tried it. But just remembering off of what the cam caps look like, just from the cam cap difference alone, I do not believe B series VTEC cams will fit in a non-VTEC B series head. I'm like fairly fucking certain of this, right? So that's why I don't talk about doing that for those. They're not. It doesn't even fit, right? I don't believe it does. And if it does, I think that if it was one of those cases where if it did fit, people have already tried to do this a long time ago. People were experimenting with these engines back in the early 90s. I'm pretty sure it would have been done if you could do it. But it's just, so that's why I don't talk about the D and the B series. There's no real point for just locking VTEC unless you're just building a performance car for the drag strip and you're locking it because you're buying a performance cam that just doesn't have those lobes because you don't need them. What do you need them for? You're going to be on the drag strip all the time. But locking VTEC does not increase power, and the reason why you do it for the K series is because you have to lock VTEC to use those bigger cams, which you can use, and using those bigger cams in those base model engines gives you a very large jump in horsepower, very large. It is the biggest bang for your buck, and that's why for the longest time I've been preaching about the Vtec killer K series engine because it is it's like you don't have to swap out for a bigger Vtec engine now. If you want to put boost to it and all that shit and you want to make all kinds of power, then yes, because the rods are the weak part of the base model engines. But if you're going to stay NA, you don't need to head swap and spend $1,000 or whatnot. You can spend like $80 to buy cams and then, modify some rocker arms to get that going, and you'll still make what those make. And as far as potential, how far they can go up in power, if you're willing to get into that and swap out pistons, 230, 240 horsepower isn't out of the realm of possibility. And that's very fucking respectable for a very cheap engine. It's one of those things where if you're an engine builder or if you're willing to tackle an engine build, you can do, very low cost things to make a base model engine very fucking powerful, very fucking competitive, and spend a whole lot less money. That's why, for years I've been preaching too that like a K series, going K series versus going B or D is more cost effective nowadays and also make you more power. You're not getting a GSR or LSV or B20V and making the kind of power with those light kind of mods. Like you're gonna see people who talk about like, oh, I do cams on a B20V and make 220, 230. Yeah, but most of those guys doing that are also doing it on E85. All right, we're talking about 90, 91, 93 pump and still making 200 plus with very, very light modification at all. And because people like to nitpick. I think that our generation, the generation of people who say that the K series is expensive, those guys are going to age out of the crowd, and these younger people who are dealing with these Ks are going to realize that it's not more expensive. It's a lot cheaper, especially when the 90s models or the 90s chassis eventually get put to the back burner because they wind up becoming so expensive that nobody just wants to fuck with them anymore. At the end of the day, Honda enthusiasts are into Honda for the most part, mainly because it's a cheap platform to modify and maintain. And as the price of the RSXs drop and the older SIs drop, you're going to see a lot more people doing that. And you're going to see a lot more, especially with those base models, that you're going to see a lot more of the VTEC killer shit. because it's just that generation of car is just better. It's better for modification than the older ones were, and it's taking a little bit of time for the idea to come around, but people are going to see it more as the time goes by. I think the majority of people out there who are complaining about K-series swaps being too expensive are the people who are regurgitating what other people have told them, and also those are people nitpicking the kind of parts they're going to use, which I've talked about ad nauseum. You're nitpicking which transmission you're going to use. You want to get the best transmission. You want to get expensive wire harnesses. You want to get expensive ECUs. All this stuff. There's ways around all this stuff to make a K-series swap a lot more affordable. And for that, guys, you got to go into my K-series playlist and just scroll until you see me talking about that. I guess thanks for watching. Social media links in the description down below. If you have questions or whatnot you want to ask me, leave them in the comments. That's what the comment section is for. If you're going straight to my DMs to ask me a question because you think I'm going to see it faster, I'm going to ignore it. I don't do that shit anymore, guys. I'm not trying to play 1,000 questions with random people anymore in my DMs. So sorry, is what it is. I got into YouTube to try and give everybody the same answer at the same time, not to try and individually talk to every single person that comes through. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and peace.